Pareto principle. A principle named after economist Vilfredo Pareto states that 20% of invested input is responsible for 80% of the results obtained. In other words, 80% of consequences stem from 20% of the causes. It is also referred to as the Pareto rule, or the 80-20 rule. The Pareto principle can be applied in a wide range of areas from management to productivity, and it is a fundamental concept that is adopted by polyglots to learn to speak rapidly. The principle simply says that you get 80% of the results from 20% of the work, which means that if you can identify which 20% provides the 80% result, you can succeed rapidly. Here's another bodybuilding example. When someone begins building muscles, he will gain a lot of muscles in the first 1 or 2 years. The progress will be super fast, and then the rate of improvement declines exponentially. And in the same way, this holds true for language learning. Unfortunately, the whole process is actually a lot faster than bodybuilding thanks to our super muscle called the brain. Now, how can you use the Pareto principle when learning a foreign language? What are the applications of the Pareto principle in language learning? It is really hard to talk about languages, and especially communication, in math terms, but I will try to explain it to you based on vocabulary research. 1. According to the Pareto principle, 20% of vocab gives you 80% of comprehension. The good news is that the payoff is actually much greater than that for language learning. The primary study that I'm going off of here was done by Mark Davies at Brigham Young University. Davies extracted the 6,000 most frequent words and broke them down by written fiction, written nonfiction, and oral speech or spoken language. But I believe oral speech and nonfiction are more relevant to most people, so I'm going to share with you those two results. Learning the 1,000 most frequently used words in the entire language will allow you to understand 76% of all nonfiction writing and an astounding 87.8% of all oral speech. Learning the top 2,000 most frequently used words will allow you to understand 84% of nonfiction and 92.7% for oral speech. And learning the top 3,000 most frequently words will get you to 88.2% for nonfiction and 94% for oral speech. There are a few studies like this for other languages, and I myself did some on English, and the results are similar. Actually, Spanish has more words than most languages, so in other languages, less words might allow you to communicate more. Second application. What you can do with very little studying is surprising. Just like in the vocabulary research, studying only 1 or 2 hours a day will provide the biggest outcome. You can study a language every day for 7 to 8 hours, but only 1 hour a day will provide the 80% of the result. Adding extra study hours to your necessary 1 hour or 2 hour maximum will only add a small fraction to the 80%. So if you are planning to set aside a lot of time for your target language, spend only a few of those hours actually studying or learning the language. The rest of the time, practice, try to speak, watch movies, listen to songs, and just have fun with it. With concentrated studying for the first 6 months, you'll be making 90% of the progress in your target language. The second 6 months, or even 1 year, will probably give you around 5% more. So when people say learning a language takes a lot of time, what they don't know is how much you can actually learn until your learning curve flattens out. Fortunately, most of what we want to know can be achieved in the first 6 months. You can learn to speak fluently in the next 6 months. While you may not be able to write a perfect article, you will be able to read one about your interests and understand most of it. But I need to remind you that your efforts must be concentrated during those 6 months. You need to put an effort in every single day. Otherwise, all of those hours will be lost, just like in high school language class. I know when you hear the Pareto principle for the first time, it sounds crazy. Yet I assure you it is promising. My purpose in this course is to give you the tools to find your 20% of the language journey and stick with it to achieve the 80% in the shortest time possible. One might object here that, since language learning is a complex process of observing the language and internalizing it, you need to be exposed to a lot of input. Well, even though it's true that tons of exposure is required, some words are used way more often than others, and learning them first will help you out big time. You need to be able to tread water before swimming butterfly stroke, right? Just like this, you need to learn the essentials while learning the language. So learn the most useful and common things first, and then slowly build upon what you learned. I can tell you that most of the language learning courses and materials fail at the Pareto principle. Even the best self-study audiobooks out there, like Assimil, they want you to learn a lot of marginal words in the beginner books. And this naturally will increase the time to fluency. Also, textbooks that are commonly used in classrooms waste students' time on marginal words. I'll give you examples of these words. Monkey, donkey, elephant, snail, parrot, plum, pear, cherry, raisin, horseshoe, bow, ladder, bell, cloud, clown, butterfly, dice, mist, parade, aerial, fireplace, post office. When was the last time you went to a post office? This is because they don't change their content for a long time. So to avoid this problem, try not to spend so much time on words that don't seem urgent. Stages. Levels. I don't like the idea of quantifying your learning journey, but I had to present you with numbers to give you an idea. I like to think of language learning in 2 stages. The individual threshold of 1,200 to 1,500 words. Whatever is your purpose of learning the language, you should know these words. This is the core of the language and the most frequently used grammar structures. The social threshold of 2,500 to 3,000 words. If your goal in learning a foreign language is to speak it, then after this point you can be socially fluent. You can watch films and read books related to your interests, and hold long conversations with natives. Elitist standards. A lot of people are under the impression that to be fluent in another language means that you speak it almost as well as your native language. Or in academic circles, they treat language learning as an academic subject. You need to study for several years, learn everything about it, learn 10,000 words and all the grammar structures, and when you are able to discuss very complex topics like philosophy or politics, then they will consider you a fluent speaker. Well, I want to tell you about polyglot Benny Lewis's stance on this. He is a big proponent of imperfectionism when it comes to language learning. He taught himself more than 7 languages in a surprisingly short time, and even though he says he is a native English speaker based on their criteria, he doesn't speak English fluently. He says, the elitist standards you require are something that we may not even have for our own native language, so why would we have them for our second one? According to their standards, to the common guidelines in most traditional language learning settings, you must be able to participate in a debate on a complex topic, such as one on philosophy or politics, can understand with ease virtually everything heard or read. There are times we don't understand what we read or listen to in our native tongue, so how do you expect this in your second language? It's not realistic. Can express him or herself spontaneously, very fluently and precisely, differentiating finer shades of meaning even in the most complex situations. Speak with no hesitations. Use complex vocabulary and advanced expressions. Never have any serious miscommunications. If this were true for our native languages, we would never have any communication problems. Be able to give the definition or translation of a low-frequency use word. Write a complex essay. I doubt most people learn a second language for academic purposes. You gotta ask yourself, can you write an essay to academic standards in your native tongue? More importantly, do you really need to? Can summarize information from different spoken and written sources, reconstructing arguments and accounts in a coherent presentation. It sounds more like an advanced communication skill rather than fluency. According to these standards, I'm not a native speaker of any language, and neither are most people. Not all of us are great communicators, so expressing ourselves fluently and precisely in the most complex situations is simply not realistic, even in our native language. Even if we are great communicators, we are human beings. We make mistakes. Aiming for perfection does not make any sense. The function of language is to effectively communicate and to be understood. If you like to have philosophical debates, use complicated expressions, and have the oration skills, that's fine. Make that a part of your goals. As for me, my language goals are more simple and social, as are most language learners. Most people talk much more about everyday things than the complex situations that some elitists demand. About their work, people in their lives, other people, football games and their holiday plans, or many other topics that people typically talk about. The standard that really matters is, what do you want to do in the language? Define your adventure. Why do you want to learn that language? Do you want to learn to speak Mandarin so that you can communicate with your business partners in China? Do you want to learn Spanish so that you can meet Spanish people, learn about them, build relationships, and have a good time? Do you want to learn German so that you can dig deep into psychology and do research using German sources? Do you want to learn Arabic so that you can know more about the Middle East? Then these must be your standards and your goals. You should be the one who sets them. Do you want to live in the country? Then your standard should be living your life in that language the same way you would in English. Can you do what you do in your native language, in the target language? This is the question you gotta ask yourself. In your new country, you will likely do a lot of the same things you did in your home country. Think about your daily activities and acquire vocabulary that correlates. But of course, if that is what you want, then make that your goal. I met a lot of business people who do business overseas. They speak Russian or German or English all the time, but their level was nowhere near these elitist standards. Most of them actually only know a couple thousand words, and they make at least 2 grammatical mistakes in every sentence they speak. If they took a test, most of them would only score for probably low intermediate. But can they communicate? Of course they can. They can make money with their languages. They know enough for their business, therefore they are good enough. So what you want to do with the language is way more important than society's standards, not unlike many areas of life.